COVID-19 changed how we learn, work, and connect with each other. While the pandemic fast tracked our shift to remote life, we were already headed in that direction, slowly becoming more and more online over the years. And deaf people are typically ahead of the curve when it comes to using technology to improve our lives through communication and sharing information. Just think of TTYs, texting, and video phones. Related to online learning, we noticed that even before COVID, there was an increase in numbers of deaf students taking classes online. In 2016, about 45% of deaf students took at least one course online, while 17% completed their entire program online. Many deaf people have jobs, family obligations, and children, and it's not easy for us to pick up and move just anywhere. In some situations, deaf people have fewer options. Online learning in a virtual space allows more options and added flexibility to make decisions that best fit our lives. In essence, it gives us more autonomy. The past year and a half have accelerated the growth of online work, learning, and life, in that some things have become more accessible. For example, when we order pickup at a restaurant, we no longer have to call through VRS because the system is now designed to fit our communication. Many webinars and conferences held online already include captioning and interpreters without the need of making a special request. These shifts have been a welcome improvement, but of course, not everything is accessible. At NDC, our job is to share information, new resources, and answer your questions. Our help team is truly our front line, addressing issues that come in from all over the nation. During the first 2 months of the pandemic, questions coming into our help team more than doubled. Many of those questions were related to technology and online access. We received questions covering a host of topics. Some of those questions were about automatic speech recognition, or ASR. Many colleges, universities, and training programs were using these auto captions in place of human captioners. We also noted many questions related to HIPAA and confidentiality when hosting telehealth sessions and clinical practicum courses with a remote service provider. There were concerns of HIPAA violations. Faculty expressed uncertainty about intellectual property. The content of the lectures they develop belongs to them, yet needs to be recorded and shared for other purposes. We also had many questions, such as how to ensure optimal access for video conferences. Can VRS be used in the virtual classroom? And how do we provide services to deaf-blind students? Visit our website to view these and more frequently asked questions along with the answers. Many deaf students have reached out to us over the past year frustrated with their online learning experience, not because they're incapable or because they don't have the skills, but because they're not receiving the accommodations they need to succeed in their college experience. One thing I've noticed over the past year is a lack of shared commitment to access. A common belief is that a deaf person is responsible to manage access, and if not the deaf person, a staff member or singular office. Depending on the setting, it is a common concept to believe the responsibility lies on the interpreter coordinator, itinerant teacher, the disability services office, or even HR. But we know that effective access must be a system wide commitment. One example I can give is the IT office. They are often responsible for purchasing training programs and learning management systems. Those systems and platforms are often not accessible. An IT department may require a particular communication system that isn't always accessible to everyone. Then, when IT can't provide access related support, the burden is once again on the deaf person. When access is a shared commitment, the entire process is vastly improved. Access is built in from the beginning, not an afterthought or a problem to be fixed later. As we continue to think about tele access, we must use a systems approach. Access is a shared commitment, not something one person or one office must bear, and it certainly isn't the sole burden of the deaf person. Another important thing to consider is what the future of virtual life looks like for deaf people and the deaf community at large. We have to remember that not all deaf people have access to the internet or the equipment required for internet access. The US Census American Community Survey provided data in the year 2019. They looked at people across the United States, ages 21 through 64, to gain a better understanding of who doesn't have access to the internet or the required equipment. Compared to the hearing population, deaf people are twice as likely to not have access to the internet or required equipment. It's clear we cannot move forward assuming everyone has the same level of access to the internet. NDC has worked closely with state leaders and colleges and universities all over the US to see how they've addressed this issue. Some state agencies have programs that provide equipment to deaf people. Some have extra funds available due to the reduction in travel because of the pandemic. So this year, they have reallocated those funds to purchase equipment so that students have access to classes, trainings, webinars, and continued education online. We learned of agencies partnering with different companies to provide laptops to deaf people. There are colleges across the US who have been able to loan equipment and Wi Fi hotspots to students in need. When VR has funds available, they can provide equipment and internet access for continued education and training. The FCC also has an emergency broadband benefit program that supports access to the internet. The question is, how can we ensure that deaf people know about these resources? How can organizations continue to think outside the box to ensure we provide support through equipment and internet access? These are paramount as our world is becoming increasingly virtual. Back to an earlier point, when it comes to working and learning online, we value having options, greater flexibility, and the increase in autonomy. It begs the question, how can we maintain those values moving forward while not assuming that everyone has equal access to the internet? As we move forward into the future, we must consider how to keep deaf people involved in this conversation. When we consider online spaces and what they may look like, as I mentioned earlier, we deaf people are experts with this technology. For example, back when we all used TTYs, we began using slang like GA, SK, and BRB. Those innovative tools have now become a part of how the entire world communicates through text. And it started with the deaf community. How can we make sure that deaf people are at the table for this conversation and ensure that they are contributors to the future of online life? How can we be certain that deaf blind and deaf disabled people are also a part of this exchange? It is essential that Black, Latinx, and Asian deaf people are all a part of this conversation. It's a shared commitment within our community. When everyone is a part of this conversation, it spurs on deeper thinking. The goal should not be to just provide access. That's a good enough bare minimum approach. But we want to provide real options, real flexibility. I don't think we quite know what that looks like yet, and I don't think we've maximized the potential of today's available technology. For example, one challenge we have seen in our work is that students struggle with finding an interpreter who has the right expertise and background for the job. Deaf students in specialized programs have trouble finding an interpreter who is a good fit and who will be a consistent interpreter throughout their studies. Deaf medical students, in particular, benefit from interpreters who have some type of medical background. Black deaf students need Black interpreters. Are schools truly capitalizing on remote services to find interpreters outside of the local area? I'm not sure. Can we do more? I hope the future shows us that we can think outside the box. and not plug and play what is traditionally happening in the classroom and assume it will work when it moves online. Let's instead maximize the opportunities that are there and continue to provide deaf people with the options, flexibility, and autonomy we need.
Hi, I want to make sure that interpreters are set and captioning is set. Okay, it seems like we're on. So before I start, want to provide a visual description. I'm in my 40s, a white female with long brown hair and pink glasses, a black shirt, and a tan cream colored background. I want to thank you all for taking the time to participate in this presentation, watching this video, and Q&A. I'm a child of the internet. I grew up as a teenager at that time as AOL and AIM chat rooms became ubiquitous. People assume that we all have access to the internet and virtual spaces in an equitable way. But looking at data, trying to better understand how many people currently have access to the internet and actually have the equipment to access the internet, like laptops, computers, phones, really, the disparity is there. There's a big gap of individuals in the United States who lack the access to the internet because of equipment. As we move forward, what the world looks like and what we need to hone in on in virtual spaces and virtual work opportunities and learning opportunities online, as that increases, we don't want to leave people behind. So I hope we can continue and keep in the back of your mind during this discussion in this 3-day conversation about the future and who we want to include and make sure everyone is included in the future. So if you have any questions, thoughts, ideas to discuss here, we're open for that and answering your questions. I see one person has a comment. Many deaf people in their towns, in their cities, don't have accessible resources like income in their rural communities to pay for the internet. And deaf people work less or fewer, have fewer opportunities than hearing people. So that would impact a deaf person. So to pay for phone and internet services, many people are not able to do that. That's the reality in the deaf community around the United States. So one question is if state agencies should start providing phones and tablets. I do see that happening more and more across the United States. More states and agencies are providing access to phones and tablets to provide the variety of resources and support that an individual might need. To support college students who are deaf, we work with colleges and universities who usually offer information through the phone or tablets to the students because learning management systems are part of the college experience. And so we have to have a design that fits the student, whether it's a phone, a tablet, or a computer. Some that are lower cost devices compared to a computer. So we need, as agencies, need to think about a way to provide access to the most people as much as possible. So I think tablets might be a solution for that. So the next question is as state director. And there's a lot of data, but we do have personal stories out there. And yes, they're true. Working at NDC, my own personal work, I love data and very comfortable with statistics and numbers, but people really learn the most and feel emotional changes based on personal stories. There's a website. We do have a lot of data and stats there, but we also have a lot of videos of personal stories from deaf consumers and deaf people around the country. I know we don't know all deaf people's experience. Not everyone's the same. Everyone has a different lived experience, and that is true for everyone. So that's true for the hearing community and the deaf community. So not just so one thing doesn't work for another, and one thing might work for another person. So there are videos and stories about those who don't have access, and we do try to collect that information. Someone made a comment about some areas having lacking internet access. And people, if you're trying to call and connect with a hearing person, they disconnect because there's freezing in the technology and there's the lack of technology. There are colleges and universities who provide online classes. If the internet is not great, accessibility doesn't happen. Meaning, if it's not great, it's not going to be accessible. The deaf student is going to miss out on everything that's happening in the class, and they don't have the same experience as their hearing peers. They might be able to, the hearing peers might be able to follow along and get enough, but signing and video does require a lot more bandwidth than just audio. So that is what we're seeing nationwide. Those who live in rural areas struggle with that access. It's very tough for them. And how do we find them? And how do we access high-speed internet for trainings and professional development, education opportunities, and connect them with that virtual world? That is true, yeah.
So somebody suggested that we should encourage TV and have exposure with captions and accessibility for deaf people. I agree, but we don't have a budget for that at NDC. Are there any more questions or any more thoughts? No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me here. And you can check our website out. You can find our contact information there, and we'll have email us anytime. We can give you information or where to find the data. We're definitely here for you. Oh, I see one more question that just came up. So the question was if we have data related to statistics related to colleges or university for resources and accessibility for disabled students and deaf students. That's a good question. And we know that policies vary all across the United States. Some colleges do provide Wi-Fi hotspots, laptop equipment for students in general. I don't know if they have a special policy in place for disabled or deaf students, but that is something that we're going to look more into for the fall. All right, and I'll type the email address for NDC on here so you could see that. Okay, I'm still reading, so just give me a moment. So somebody had asked, how can we get more people to be aware of VRS? That's a great question. At the NDC, we talk a lot about how we can change people's attitudes in particular, and that's hard. That's the hardest thing I think that we have to do. We can teach, we can explain, and people do understand, but when it comes to actually getting the call, it doesn't fit what they actually envision what a call should look like, and they hang up, and that comes up often. In the educational system, we do see situations occur frequently where faculty will have a deaf student in the classroom and that deaf student has a delayed response, or teachers are asking the classroom if there are any answers, and it really diminishes the opportunity for that deaf student to get involved. So the question is, how can we change attitudes and thinking, not only for that deaf students, for people with disabilities in general? Sometimes we need process to process the information or think about it, or we need more time for the captioner. So we need to change those attitudes. And I think that's the reason why we're all here today, so we could discuss how we can educate, train, and change ourselves. So I'll wait a few more minutes and just see if any more questions arise. Ken says he's going to email some information regarding the T-Mobile project, 10 million. I look forward to learning more about that. I think the more information that we can share with each other, the more resources that we can share with each other, the better it is going to be for our community and for deaf people. Someone had asked about smartphone usage, to use that to do speech recognition for the classroom. I see that often with ASR because many deaf students, the accessibility is not perfect in what the system has offered us. Of course, they offer an interpreter or captions, but sometimes the quality is just not so good. Or sometimes it doesn't meet and provide the right information, and deaf people often fill in the gaps, or we use our own equipment, our own phones sometimes, or even ASR, and we try to get by. And I think that is a concerning trend of what it's going to look like for the future, thinking that people just have good enough equipment, which is not really okay. And I think that we can see that often in the National Deaf Center. Do people use smartphones in the classroom? Or if they're going to use ASR in the classroom, I think that they're fine. And I think we have to think fine does not mean optimal accessibility. So there's a lot of challenging questions that are coming up now as technology is advancing so much more faster than policies are. And we have to make sure that the technology does advance the same rate as those policies are as we move forward. All right, well, you asked really wonderful questions. It's a wonderful group, and I'm very excited to join this conversation. I look forward to continuing this. Have a great afternoon. And I'll see you at the next breakout room. There's going to be 3 breakout rooms.